Welcome back to another Ohio X podcast, The Future Lab. Today we are talking with Liz Engel, who is a reporter at the Cincinnati Business Courier and leads editorial for its sister site, Cincy Inno, which covers tech and startup news in the Cincinnati southwestern Ohio region. Her past work has been featured at Forbes.com, WCPO, and Cincy Magazine. She's a Cincinnati native who made her return to the Queen City in 2014 following stints in North Carolina and Tennessee. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I am too. And as we were chatting very briefly right before we started recording, it's an incredibly exciting time for tech in Ohio. But feel like every week I'm coming across a new story that you're reporting something awesome that's happening. There's always business news, so we'll dive into that a little bit. But if you could just share a little bit about who you are, your background. You've been covering the business space for a while now, but curious, what led you to it and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I took the traditional path into journalism. I wasn't really into it in high school, wasn't on the school yearbook or anything, and went to college as kind of an econ major.
Hmm.
So it only took maybe a 3 hour night class to kind of switch my focus. And I initially wanted to do sports reporting. I had been an athlete my whole life. English was always my best subject. But when I got my first newspaper job, there wasn't an opening in the sports department, but there was in business. So ever since then, I have been a business reporter. I started around 2008 when there was a great economic recession. So lots of news to cover, not always good news to cover. So I think that's why I kind of gravitated towards the startup coverage. It's not always positive, but everyone
Yeah.
is really enthusiastic about the ideas they have and yeah, the vision that they see for their company.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned 2008 because that's around the time that I graduated college too. And so I think it's been interesting for kind of this, I guess we're older millennial, that type of, generation to see kind of the economy and coming into the workforce with that, as like the thing hanging over everyone's heads, an incredibly difficult time. And then, this wild, especially in the tech world, like this wild, like bull run and then have covid and just the ups and downs. It's a really interesting time, so I can only imagine for a journalist the stories that you're coming across, and you're seeing. And so maybe kind of for those that are listening from Columbus or Cleveland, or we get a lot of boomerangs that are listening from places like on the coast, for instance, that want to check in what's happening in their hometown of Cincinnati in this case. What's going on? What have you been up to? What have you been covering? What are the big storylines for kind of the tech or business community in the Cincinnati area?
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like this was a year where the big hits kept coming and coming. Like every other week, we would have another kind of groundbreaking raise or exit, or just a new entrepreneur or a second time founder coming up with an idea and ready to kind of share what they're doing. Earlier this year, we had 80 Acres raise $160 million. They are a vertical farming startup, so a lot of tech and innovation happening in their space, and really two smart founders who have been in the business a long time. At 160 million, I guess when you compare it to West Coast money, maybe doesn't seem like a lot, but this was, a groundbreaking raise for our region. I think if you combined all the money our top funded startup had raised to date, that exceeded that amount. So, just big news. Syncor, biopharma startup that we have in town, followed with a $143 million raise, which, was just great. And they are using the money to fund some clinical trials. So we should see some really great movement from them, I think, going forward. And, just outside of venture capital, like I said, we had some second time founders, start some new companies that they're excited about sharing, and, some really young entrepreneurs that are coming up in the space and that seem to want to build in Cincinnati. So that's really exciting to see.
Yeah, it is. I'd be curious, are you seeing any types of trends or kind of similarities between some of the kind of, as we're thinking of tech specifically, or even startups more specifically? Because one of the things that I've enjoyed kind of following, and especially from the three C's, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, and you mentioned 80 acres, so that's agriculture and ag tech. But agriculture and farming, that's something that's, a big piece of Ohio's economy, not necessarily the tech side, but just the industry as a whole and in general. And some of the others that have been popping up, they seem to be around areas that kind of Ohio is good at. And I know Cincinnati has a very unique kind of business flair, that's uniquely Cincinnati, with things happening at the airport and kind of D2C and designer and those things. So are you seeing, is there like a Cincinnati theme to some of the stories you've been seeing? Or are we getting to the point where it's just kind of really diverse and it's happening across sectors and industries?
I think it's a lot more diverse than it used to be. I think Cincinnati has kind of been known for maybe its health tech startups with Cincinnati Children's and UC Health and kind of the innovation happening around those facilities. But to have an ag tech company like 80 Acres really grow in this region, Cincinnati's kind of a mix of the metro and then kind of suburban areas. So I think that's a little unique for us. Fintech is a really big focus for some of our startup catalyst groups. You have Fifth Third, and then you have Fortune 50 companies and Kroger and P&G that are always looking to kind of tap into the ecosystem and innovate. I think fintech will be a big player going forward, but I really think that it's a much more diverse ecosystem than it has been in the past.
And so you're different than most of our other guests in that you're a journalist. So you don't, you're reporting on the news and you're gathering it. You're not, you don't have the bias. And so curious of, as you're talking with people, as Cincinnati, Southwestern Ohio in this case, but I think, there's so much similarity again between all of our regions. What do you think, or what do you hear, I should say, on kind of keys for that next step to continue the growth, continue the momentum? Because as you mentioned, 2021 has been such a really big year for Southwestern Ohio. As we're, coming into a new year, 2022, what do you think, people are looking for in order for the region to kind of take that next step?
I think there's a lot of push to maybe shed this all shucks Midwest mentality that we have. And I think some of the younger founders are actually going to be the ones that push it because they want to talk about what they're doing and they don't want to be like, yeah, it's fine. I'm just doing great things and I'm not going to tell anybody. They want to be vocal and they want to share it on social media and they want the publicity. I think that will just, we have to share our story to
Yeah.
grow. If people don't know what we're doing, then they don't know to invest in Cincinnati or Ohio. So I think that is going to be a big trend next year. I think companies will be more public with what they're doing. I mean, we had a grid, one of a biotech or a Bitcoin mining startup, that's going to go public, but they've been under the radar since 2018 when they started. And I don't know the reason for that, but I think it's important to talk about what we're doing, and yeah, that will move everything forward.
Yeah, and that's why I really love, and it has been great to see the role of Cincy Inno and the other Inno um, news centers and hubs that have popped up in Columbus and I believe Cleveland as well now too, because I think that's been one of the things where a lot of people awareness is such a big thing. And I think you said it
Yeah.
perfectly, where people don't know things exist or that they're out there or happening. It's a really tough place to start from. So it's really rewarding, I think, to be able to read and know that there's coverage for this. So, not necessarily a question, but a kudos, and I'm thankful that you all exist and are telling those stories because, and I know it's good and bad, and you report just the truth, and it's not just storytelling, but it's real journalism, and I think it's needed to kind of show and bring light to this aspect of our economy.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to have a release about a big funding round, but to really
Yeah,
dig into what the money
yeah,
will be used for and what it means and yeah, what the opportunities are going forward. Yeah, I mean, Cincy Inno is a great product. When I came on about a year ago to the Courier team, I mean, it existed, but we didn't have
yeah.
anybody on the ground running the show. So it's kind of been nothing but up with where we go in terms of our audience and the kind of content we produce. No, it's a
Yeah,
lot.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be curious are there certain plans in store that you're able to share for next year, or is it just continuing to dig into these
Yeah.
types of stories, kind of going deeper as you mentioned?
Yeah, I think we want to focus more on features. Like, what can we
Okay.
offer that's different than the typical day-to-day coverage? I would like to talk about founders that maybe haven't been successful. If they had a company that didn't work, why? And what are the reasons and what have they learned, especially if they kind of jump back in the game? So not just sharing the positives, but kind of the ecosystem at large. What can we do better? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Another kind of question or a topic that I know I've had a lot of interest in following and others have are the roles of the universities in Cincinnati, the University of Cincinnati with like the 1819 Innovation Hub and what's been built there. If you could just maybe talk a little bit about some of the reporting you've done and what's happening on campus and why there's kind of an excitement because I've had the opportunity to be in Cincinnati and kind of see it. I know, I live in Columbus, so I know and see and can kind of see the momentum around Columbus Innovation District and then Cleveland as well. But Cincinnati's was first, which I think is a real testament to the city, the region, the leaders, especially UC and David Adams there. But if you could just talk maybe for those that aren't familiar with it and a little bit about it, because the other fun thing I've enjoyed is seeing how there's three innovation districts, but they're all a bit different and they have their unique local flair. And so Cincinnati's is different than Columbus and it's different than Cleveland.
Yeah, Cincinnati's Innovation District is anchored by Cincinnati Children's, which might be a little bit different, and the university. And the idea is to keep talent here and to grow talent here. There's going to be big gaps in hiring for tech jobs in the future, and you can't just recruit people here, but you have to grow the talent here as well. And David Adams is a great spokesman for the district and everything the university is doing, and he's really been leading the charge. The district is expanding. There's a digital futures building that's under construction now, and we just added two properties for underrepresented founders. So kind of giving them a landing spot in town instead of being at a hotel downtown for a couple days, really letting them see the region and why they should locate their businesses here. And just, yeah, I mean, I don't know the state's focus as far as, Columbus and Cleveland, but it seems like there's a lot of interest from state officials in growing the concept statewide. And I don't know, maybe we can all work together just to recruit to Ohio as a whole. So maybe it's not just a Cincinnati versus Columbus versus Cleveland kind of mindset.
Yeah, and earlier you had mentioned the region's leaders, and I know like Centrifuge and Pete Blackshaw are definitely some that come to mind when I think of you mentioned the fintech, and with Fifth Third and the other kind of financial services, that's an area where to me it's so fascinating to see the similarities between our three C's, which kind of on the cultural level Cincinnati is uniquely Cincinnati and Skyline Chili and the Reds and the Bengals. And then, Cleveland, it's different. It's the Indians. And there's that, the sports rivalry, and Columbus is kind of in between the two. But I've lived in all three. But it's funny how all of them seem to have very similar, industries because we're still a state, we're still close geographically. But you mentioned kind of the healthcare with Cincinnati Children's and UC Med. Well, Columbus has great healthcare. Cleveland certainly does too, but also the financial services and insurance. And it's fun to see kind of the insurtechs and the fintechs. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to your point about collaboration of, if they're kind of doing similar things and they have traditional kind of businesses that are big and have been around for a while. Well, if there's a fintech doing something in Cincinnati, how do you open up the Columbus market with our big banks and financial institutions or Cleveland? So I think, to your point, I think there's something there and that's what I enjoy, what we kind of do, kind of connecting in a certain sense, but then also some of the bigger kind of capital intensive groups are able to make those investments too.
Yeah, you've seen a lot of the legacy big co's invest in the innovation district,
Yeah.
not just because I think maybe they have to. I think because they want to. The pandemic probably slowed a lot of that team working that they were doing in the 1819 Innovation Hub, and I know that they were really looking forward to getting everybody back in the building to kind of work together more closely.
Yeah, it's an impressive facility, and I always say that if people haven't haven't had an excuse to go to an event there or check it out in some way, to do it, because I think it's a real testament to getting all the big co's and the traditional businesses even under the same roof with a lot of the tech companies and what's happening at the university. Kind of a final question of before we move into some of our quick fun ones. What's your favorite story that you reported on, or maybe favorite's not the right word, but maybe important that you wish, more people would hear about, and we can drop it in the links for people to check out when we share this.
Yeah, I think I would circle back to the 80 acres raise because we kind of did a two-part story with that. Of course, we helped break the initial news of the funding round, but then we really kind of dug deeper into who is investing and what 80 acres plans to do with the funding and kind of what it looks like going forward. And they really liked to focus on Hamilton specifically and why they chose Hamilton to grow. I mean, Hamilton at one time was a huge manufacturing hub, and then kind of all the industry left. So it's really seen a resurgence,
Yeah.
not just with 80 acres, but a Spooky Nook, which is going to be a huge kind of sports event space, hotel, new restaurant. So I think it's it's almost a Hamilton story as much as it was an 80 acres story. So that was a fun one to tell. And, it took a lot of time to do. It was almost kind of a feature cover story kind of write up, but had a lot of fun with that one. Anytime you can interview multiple people about something really exciting happening in their community, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one, and we'll drop that in, and kudos again for spending the time on it, because I know there's, which we'll get to kind of at the end, but I know there's a lot of competing factors out there for a journalist's time, and it's busy for sure. So we'll hop into some kind of quick fun questions that we ask all of our guests, and the answers don't have to be quick or anything, but just kind of a fun way to kind of, you know tie in all the different work from journalists to startup founders to tech execs to community, catalysts, etc. But we'll start with this first one: is what is a favorite read, listen, or watch? So this could be a book, a podcast, a show, and we like to say that this doesn't have to be work related. It can be. But as we started this series, we did this in a pandemic, so people would throw out Tiger King after they spent 10 hours on their laptop all day, and there's no wrong answer. But favorite book, podcast, or show?
We did watch the Tiger King 2 or whatever the latest season was, just because we invested so much time in it last year. I don't, which is probably not great as a journalist, don't have a ton of time to read other than like the kids' books. Our children make us repeat over and over, but I do love the Planet Money podcasts. They're really just quick, easy kind of listens, and they're business related. There's one in particular about Jeopardy that is kind of my favorite.
Huh.
It's got a personal tie to the journalist that put it together. And it's funny. I even made my husband listen to it. I was kind of sending him the link. Have you listened to it yet? It's really good.
Is that the NPR Planet Money?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that one's been mentioned on here before, so I'll definitely have to check that one out. But yeah, good answer, and yeah, those podcasts where they come out like that, and you feel smarter at the end. It's a better time better spent than sometimes reality shows or Tiger Kings.
A good thing to do when you run or just in the car.
Yeah,
you're just kind of killing some time anyway. And I feel like we need to circle back to Succession. Like everyone's really big on that lately, and we started it, but just never kind of kept up with it. So that's on our list to start next.
You got to get into Succession, and the at least my take, and no spoilers, is I could see why people like kind of ebb and flow, especially to begin, because sometimes, at least again, this is all my take. It's sometimes like the middle episodes of the series, and I think there's 3 now. You're kind of like, all right, like how much are we there's some good acting, but what are we accomplishing? But at least the last 2 seasons, man, the finales have just been incredible. So
I saw everybody post about it, had a little bit of fun, and said we need to pick this back up. So
you got to get on that one. That's a good one. All right, second question is, what is a problem you'd solve? So we're kind of taking off the journalist hat, and this is kind of if you see a problem in the world, or just something that you're like, this should be started. So a problem you'd solve, or a business you would start if funding was no issue. And so we like to say, someone gives you $50 million to start a business or solve a problem, or get an idea out there. What would yours be?
This is a hard question, because I think that's why I like startup coverage, because I don't have like an entrepreneurial bone in my body. Like I just don't have it. But if I could pick anything, we flew to Florida recently, and just air travel in general is
Yeah.
not a fun experience. So some kind of like time warp or just like supersonic speed travel where you could just get to a destination in the blink of an eye. That would be my idea.
I agree with that one. I just for the Thanksgiving holiday, I visited family on the West Coast, and especially on the way there, like, there was just delays, and, you're traveling, you're getting in late, and it's 3 AM, what our bodies are used to, and it's tough. So I'm hoping that Tesla or, Elon Musk, they can get and I don't have a Tesla, so I'd have to, step one would be getting that, but that where they do the autonomous driver and you can in theory just like sleep. So if you're going to Florida, you can like drive through the night, know you're going to get there at 9 a.m., but you can just like safely nap. And I think that would be a game changer.
That would, yeah, just being crammed into a small seat with hundreds of other people. It's just not appealing after
No.
not having done that for probably 2 years.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's like this is, I miss traveling, but I don't really miss
No.
this.
Yeah.
I I was also taken aback, and I'm sure you traveled with your kids, but uh, I didn't bring snacks for the trip out there, and I got like a wrap and like little bag of chips or something at the airport in Detroit during my layover, and it was like $20. It's like how is this possible?
Yeah, forgot about this part. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, all the fun parts of that. Well, travel's good, and that's definitely needed. Third one is, what is your favorite place in Ohio?
Oh man, I have a couple. So I mean, I love being on the water or near the water. We have some friends that go to Lake Lochengrin. It's in Eaton, Ohio. So we
Hmm.
try to tag along with them as much as we can. A couple months ago, we were in Put in Bay, which kind of sounds funny. This time of year, it's really beautiful. It used to be like the party spot back in the day, but now we take our kids there. So, but it's really pretty, just kind of like the remoteness of it, just getting off the grid a little bit. Even just the riverfront in Cincinnati.
Yeah,
When I left Cincinnati, gosh, 20 years ago, it didn't exist. There was really nothing down there. And to see how much it's grown up, it's just really exciting for our
yeah,
city. Yeah.
yeah. It really is, and Cincinnati's because I went to school not in Cincinnati, but in southwestern Ohio, and uh, it's I don't know, maybe it's just the nostalgia of like visiting college friends and that type of stuff, but downtown I think is just really, especially I think summers it's just fun, especially if maybe like the Reds are in town or something, and it's just a unique, very prideful city. For the restaurants are fantastic, and again, Reds are in town. It's a lot of fun. So
Yeah.
Riverfront is an awesome time. We'll do a final question, which is going to be unique for you, but wanted to ask, like, what is a typical day? And I know that right away this is a bad question, but a typical day for a journalist, because I think that's one of the things that why I was excited to have you on the podcast is, you know, better connecting or at least helping business people and tech founders, tech employees, understand just what you all do. And, you work with companies all the time to, you don't write a story every time they send you something, of course, and you do your reporting, but just I think it would be cool to kind of give them a sense of a day in the life, which I'm sure is different every single day.
Yeah. Well, that's the fun part about it. You can never predict too what's going to happen
Yeah.
in a given day and what kind of news is going to come. We always have a 9:30 meeting with our entire staff to kind of talk about the stories we're working on, which is great because it kind of prioritizes what you want to cover that day. So usually start the day with that, and then really it's just writing for a couple hours. I'll have interviews kind of scattered in between that. Used to be a lot more in person, but everyone's kind of shifted back to the virtual. But and then yeah, just kind of following up on story leads, story ideas, any kind of longer features we're working on, and then usually that's it. It's like I said, it's different every day. Depends on who you're talking to, what kind of stories come up. And then you think you have an easy morning, and then something huge will break, and you have to drop everything and switch. You should see my browser tab. There's probably 80 tabs open because you're just jumping back and forth between stuff all day long. But it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying working for the Courier and Inno. It's been great.
That's cool. And you know, I actually think because I've never been a journalist, but I've spent time in kind of media and working with a lot of journalists, and I think uh, journalists and kind of startups where it's fast paced, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get into every day, and there's all sorts of fire drills. I think there's a lot more in common than probably. I'm sure journalists probably know that, but I
Yeah.
bet there's a lot of startup people that wouldn't think that and wouldn't know just kind of the craziness and how you work on a team, but you're also kind of a, you know, an individual contributor where it's your byline, you got to pump out your story. So
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's some parallels there for
Yeah.
sure.
And I won't ask unless you want to answer what your worst pitch ever has been, but maybe like how should, if there's a startup founder or a tech company listening to this, or you know just anyone, right? If they're a citizen, and whether it's in their industry or in their local community, and they're like, hey, we have a story idea, or you know, what are kind of, you know, from a journalist perspective, how do you, and you mentioned meeting with people and sources and doing interviews, but could you talk to kind of the other side of why people should, you know, have a vested interest in reading and consuming, but then also, you know, working with and sending you ideas or sending you, you
Yeah.
know, information.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times if you don't send us the ideas, we don't know unless you're connected with one of our sources or they
Yeah.
kind of you kind of just find out about it through the grapevine. But I would say two of the biggest mistakes would be spelling my name wrong, which is not hard to do because it's just Liz. And
Yeah.
spelling Cincinnati wrong is also a huge pet peeve. Somebody sent a pitch today and they spelled it Sin Can Natty, and I don't know how that happened. The the biggest thing with the Inno product and the Courier and all of our newspapers is just we're really hyper local. So if there's a connection at all in our ecosystem, we'll probably run with it. But if you don't kind of point that out or make it obvious or have to kind of like really search for it,
Yeah.
the odds of it kind of making it on our radar are a little tougher. So
Yeah.
yeah, hyper local, what's going on in our community. If it's somebody that used to live here, but they have a great startup somewhere else, you know, it's a little bit of a stretch, but we're always interested in kind of keeping up with people as they leave and maybe they'll come back. So
Yeah.
yeah, and as far as keeping up with what's going on and consuming content, I mean, there's so much out there. So our biggest thing is keeping things short, sweet, relevant, kind of telling you what you need to know in a very condensed format, most of the time, at least,
Yeah.
and what you can take away, what you kind of learn from it, you know, for your own business.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's our audience.
Yeah, well, that's great, and thank you for sharing that. And how can people, if they want to read Cincy Inno, read your work, or connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, Cincy Inno is cincyinno.com is the website. You can find us through the Cincinnati Business Courier too, and pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn. So feel free to connect and reach out anytime.
Great. Well, we'll drop both the website, of course, but then also your Twitter
Okay.
and there, so people can hopefully scroll down and follow you and go direct to the source and get their Cincinnati business, tech, and innovation news from you. But Liz, this has been great. I really appreciate it. You were, I think, one of my last in-person things right before
Right.
the pandemic, where we met for coffee. But it's amazing that we're coming up on 2 years of that. But thanks for stopping in and sharing your work and sharing a little bit about what's happening in Cincinnati. We appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to reconnect and thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you, Liz. And we appreciate everyone for listening. Again, we'll drop in the comments or the show notes how to connect, how to read, and check out some of the work Liz and her colleagues are doing in Cincinnati. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.